My name is Jim Caseman, and of course, we're talking about a life story, Jim and Kathleen Caseman, from as far back as you can remember to where we are now. And we're going to have some tapes that Kathleen made before she went to heaven. They'll be worked in too, as later on, Desi's going to work that in. Now, we were talking about the Russian book project. It cost us about $1 million by the time it was all over with, and I said the largest, most expensive part of that time was smuggling them in. And we had stories, for example, there was one lady in Finland, and of course, Finland and Russia share borders, and she'd go back and forth because in the Winter War, Russia had taken 1/3 of Finland away because they wanted more territory between St. Petersburg and the West. And so there were relatives on the other side, that ended up becoming part of Russia. And so they'd go back and forth. Well, she rigged up a deal so it looked like she was pregnant, and she'd have books in there. Well, after a while, the guards got suspicious because certainly she's not an elephant. She's been pregnant for over 9 months, and I guess elephants are pregnant for 11. And of course, she got caught. And then there were books that were put into I guess wheat was going to Russia, and down with the ships in the harbor, down to Louisiana, I guess it would have been, they put books in the ship in boxes, big boxes, and they put them in there, and they ended up, people on the other end knew it was coming. And then even some were put in effect, a tractor factory. They put them inside some tractors that were going to Russia. And it was crazy, all the things, how clever people were. And then Russia was getting gravel from the Polish side to do roads on the Russian side. And of course, they put the books into the bottom of the certain gravel truck and gravel. And of course, they're waiting for that on the other end. Well, this is really getting to be something, and on and on and on. So it was pretty something. Anyway, so that's what happened. And then the Iron Curtain fell, and you should have seen the letters that we got from Russia. We took a picture of it. It's a mountain of letters from Russia thanking us for the books. And now we were able to go Christ for the Nations. They're one of the sons of that, what was his name now? But anyway, he had a printing business, one of the sons of the man who started Christ for the Nations. And he had moved his equipment now over to Belarus when the Iron Curtain fell. So he was positioned, he was ready to print for ministries, print books. And so we did the last 1,100,000 books we printed inside of Russia then, in Belarus, and we opened up an office in Belarus. And of course, people would come because there's 12 time zones in Russia. And we'd hear stories, they'd be coming to us all night long in a train just to get their packet of books. And the word was out. And so that was pretty exciting, distributing all those books. And then, of course, we then ended up sharing office with Kenneth Copeland Ministries. They wanted to get into Russia. So they shared our office with us. And while they were in the process of doing their paperwork and stuff to be recognized. And then eventually, when our project was finished, our books were distributed, we left, and the Copelands took over our office for a short time, I guess, and as they began to establish themselves in Russia. And so that's kind of some of the more things concerning the Russian book project. And Brother Hagin really believed that others did too, that the believer's authority was the message that helped bring the Iron Curtain down. So I don't know. Anyway, that's what I'm told. All right. And so then that was a very exciting project. All right. Now this is, we're talking 83. And so then I will, I'm traveling now by car, cross country, coast to coast, and Canada. I don't know, a lot of miles put on in all these years. And then in 1985, I decided, well, I think it's time to learn to fly. Because that way I can go to a meeting, have it, and still fly 300 miles and still be home that night in my own bed. And whatever. And so then, I was 43 years old, in 1985 when I started to learn to fly. And now God had put it in my heart that I was to believe for an airplane, and that would have been in 1976. And I had asked Kathleen to take me to the certain motel in Wilmer, Minnesota, and to drop me off because I didn't want anybody to see my car there because they'd know I was out there or whatever. And I wanted to spend 24 hours just fasting and praying. So I got there, she dropped me off, and I went into the room and went to work. And see, it's really funny because I'd be praying and falling asleep. I couldn't stay awake. And that went on from that afternoon all the way up to almost midnight. And I really got into it then. I was wide awake. And by morning then, or early that morning, things really started to happen. God began to speak to my heart, and I kept jotting all these things down, and what we were to do and this and that. And then one thing, then at the end, he said, he wanted me to believe for an airplane. And I said, you got to be kidding. That's just back in 1976. That's way a lot more money than I have, and what have you. So then I went ahead, put that down on my list, believe for an airplane. All right, this is 85, so 7 years back would be 70 something or another, huh? Anyway, it was 7 years later, 76 for 70, 80, 73, 83. Yeah, it'd be 7 years later or more. All of a sudden, I had this impression. Just go and fly in the airplane. Just rent it to have somebody take you up for an hour. And so I did that. Paid the money. We went up. And so I felt he impressed. He wanted me to get into the airplane and get a feel for it and what have you. And so then, shortly after that, then 1985, I began to take lessons, and I really pushed hard to get my private's license right away. I mean, I was out the airport all the time, nonstop. And then I got my private's license. I passed the written and the flying and everything. So I could now rent a single engine plane and fly to wherever I got to go. Now what I did, I immediately started getting my twin engine flying lessons and the tests that I had to write for that too and everything. And so I would fly from Tulsa, let's say, to Minneapolis. Then I'd hire somebody in Minneapolis to take me up. And even before that, before I had my private's license, I would fly commercially, let's say, to Minneapolis. And then I'd be there for several days with meetings and stuff, and I'd hire pilots in Minneapolis to help finish the private's license. That's right. So I had people in Minneapolis, Minnesota, South Dakota, California, and that way I was getting instructors that were used to flying in mountains. They were used to the winter, the snow, and everything. It was wonderful, the tips I'd get from them. And then I could fly myself after I got my private's license, and then I would get people in different cities to help me with the twin engine thing. And that didn't take long, and I had my twin engine rating and passed the test for that. And then I rented the twin engine plane, the very twin engine plane that I was learning to fly in, twin engine. I would rent that by the hour and fly to meetings here and there or whatever. And that was pretty interesting. And that's how I ended up then flying twin engines. And then, of course, from that point on, it was always twin engines. And I had one plane given to me somewhere along here by Mark Bazee. He had an airplane, and he thought he was going to fly, and then decided it wasn't for him. And it was an Aztec. And my mechanic told me that it was a gentleman's airplane. And it was an incredible airplane. It was stable. It had twin engines, short wings. It could carry heavy load. I put wingtips on the end for more fuel, and it just handled it with no problem. And it was basically a real trouble-free airplane for me. And it was good to have two airplanes. So one's in maintenance, and every year you got to do an annual, and that takes a lot of money and a lot of time. You can fly that while the other one's being annual. And so that's how we started getting into airplanes. All right, we better go with the next session.